All right, ready to dive into some seriously big questions today. We're talking the nature of reality, the universe, and our place in it all.
Big stuff.
You asked for insights into spiritual enlightenment and the path to unity with the divine, and, well, we've got some really fascinating material to explore.
Should be interesting.
We'll be drawing wisdom from the teachings of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, as explained by Osho.
Yes. We're going to be looking closely at a discourse by Osho, where he unpacks verses 30 and 31 from the Japji Sahib, a key text in Sikhism.
Okay, so ancient wisdom, but seen through a modern lens. This should be good. So where does this journey towards oneness begin?
Well, Osho starts with a really interesting idea, actually. He says the path to the divine is like hitting rewind on creation. It's the same route, just in reverse. Imagine you're on a road trip. You took the highway to get to your destination, and you take the same highway to return home.
So the blueprint for enlightenment is already within us. We just need to figure out how to go in the opposite direction.
Exactly. But Osho suggests that most of us, we start off lost in the many.
The many.
All our desires, ambitions, and material pursuits. These things create a sense of separation from that fundamental oneness.
We get so caught up in the day-to-day, the distractions, that we lose sight of the bigger picture.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is that both science and religion seem to agree on where it all began, at least. That the universe originated from a single source.
Wait, science and religion finding common ground. Now that's something I gotta hear.
Well, think about it. Science calls this source energy or electricity. Religion calls it God.
So same starting point, different language. But does that really change things?
You know, Osho makes a really great point about the power of names. God suggests a relationship, a connection, while electricity feels cold, purely intellectual.
Yeah.
We might study electricity, but we don't pray to it, right? Or feel a sense of awe and wonder in its presence.
It's true, we don't build temples to electricity. But is there more to this convergence than just names?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Both science and religion, they point to this one manifesting as a trinity. Science has its electrons, neutrons, and protons. Hinduism speaks of Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh. And in Christianity, it's the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
I'm seeing the parallels, but are they more than just symbolic?
Well, Osho takes it a step further. He highlights how the functions we attribute to these Hindu deities actually mirror the roles of these subatomic particles.
Hold on, are you saying there's a connection between, like, Brahma and an electron? I need you to break this down for me.
Well, Brahma is associated with creation, Vishnu with preservation, and Shiva with destruction. Now think about electrons. They create bonds forming molecules. Neutrons, they play a role in stabilizing the atom's nucleus. And then there's this concept of radioactive decay associated with protons, representing a kind of destruction or transformation.
Okay, that's pretty mind-blowing. I definitely wouldn't have connected those dots on my own. But if we're starting from this point of multiplicity, how do we make our way back to the one? Do we have to become particle physicists?
No physics degree required. Osho outlines this return as a progression. You move from the many to the three, and finally to the one.
All right, so let's map out this journey. How do we move from the many to the three?
Well, it begins by cultivating a state of witnessing, or sakshibhav,
Sakshibhav.
meaning observing our thoughts, desires, and experiences without getting swept away by them.
So stepping back from the constant chatter of the mind and becoming an observer of our own lives.
Exactly. And through this shift in perspective, three distinct elements emerge. You, the observer, the world, the observed, and the process of observation itself.
That makes sense. So instead of being lost in the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions, we develop this awareness that we are separate from them.
Yeah, you've got it. And that is, in essence, the mark of a sadhak, a seeker on the path to spiritual awakening.
Okay, I'm with you so far. We're on this highway, heading back to the one. We've taken the exit for witnessing, which leads us to the three. But how do we get from those three to the final destination, the one? What happens to the observer, the observed, and the process of observation?
This is where things get really interesting. As we deepen this witnessing practice, the many, all those distractions and desires, they start to fade away. They lose their power over us. And eventually, even the three, the observer, the observed, and the active observing, begin to dissolve.
Dissolve? How does that even happen? I mean, aren't I always going to be me?
Well, this dissolution happens as we realize that the separation between the observer and the observed is an illusion. They're not truly distinct, but different facets of the same underlying reality.
So the separation we experience is all in our heads. But if everything stems from this one, does that mean we have no free will? Are we all just puppets in some grand cosmic play?
Osho dives right into this question, introducing the concept of hukam, which translates to divine will. It suggests that ultimately everything is guided by a higher power, a force beyond our individual control.
Okay, I see where this is going, and I have to admit, the idea that I'm not really in control is a bit unsettling. But I'm also curious, how does Osho explain this? Because if it's all predetermined, what's the point of striving for anything?
Well, he uses a rather amusing analogy to illustrate this. He
Right.
talks about a fly sitting on a chariot wheel boasting about kicking up all the dust.
I can picture that little fly so proud of itself. But what's the deeper meaning?
It's a humorous reminder that we often take credit where it isn't due. Our ego loves to believe it's in control, but ultimately there's a much larger force at play.
So how do we reconcile this idea of divine will with our own sense of agency? Is there any point in setting goals if it's all preordained?
Osho suggests that recognizing this hukam, this divine will, can actually be incredibly freeing.
Freeing, but isn't that a fatalistic view? Does it negate our individual efforts?
Not at all. Think about it. Surrendering this illusion of control allows us to let go of the need to micromanage every aspect of our lives. We can act without attachment to outcomes, knowing that things unfold as they should.
Okay, I can see how that might be liberating. But it takes a lot of trust, doesn't it? Trust in something beyond our comprehension.
It does, and that's where faith comes in. Not blind faith, but a faith rooted in the understanding that we're not isolated beings, but interconnected threads in this grand tapestry of existence.
I'm definitely rethinking my whole approach to life after hearing this. But we've covered a lot of ground in a short amount of time. Before we dive into the practical aspects of this journey, can we back up for a second and explore this idea of hukam a little more? I still have some questions.
You're right, hukam definitely deserves more exploration. It's a core principle in Sikhism, and I can see how it could be kind of a head-scratcher at first.
Yeah, definitely. It seems paradoxical. We're talking about this journey towards realizing our oneness with the divine, but then there's this idea that ultimately we're not the ones in control. How do those two ideas coexist?
It's a good question. That paradox is exactly what makes hukam so fascinating. It's not about, resigning ourselves to fate or just becoming passive. It's more about recognizing there's this deeper level of reality, a force that's kind of orchestrating this cosmic dance, if you will.
So, acknowledging that there's a grand design, a higher intelligence at work.
Yes, and accepting that we're part of something much larger than ourselves. It's a shift from I am the doer to I am an instrument.
I see. So I'm starting to see how this ties into the concept of surrender, letting go of the ego's need to control everything.
Exactly. It's about trusting that flow of life, recognizing that even challenges and setbacks, they're part of that larger unfolding. But it's not about becoming passive or, giving up on your goals.
So it's not about sitting back and just waiting for things to happen. We still have a role to play.
Absolutely. In fact, recognizing hukam can actually empower us to act with greater clarity and purpose.
How so? I'm still a little fuzzy on how that, translates into action.
Well, think of it this way. When we're consumed by the ego's need to control, our actions are often driven by fear, desire, or a sense of lack, right? But when we surrender to hukam, we're able to tap into this deeper source of wisdom and inspiration. Our actions become more aligned with our true purpose.
So instead of forcing things, we're aligning ourselves with that higher will, becoming instruments of the divine.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And that alignment brings a sense of peace and ease, even in the midst of challenges.
It sounds like this concept requires a lot of faith and trust, especially when life throws, those curveballs our way.
Yeah, it does. But it's not about blind faith. It's about cultivating this deep understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, recognizing that even in the midst of apparent chaos, there's this underlying order.
Okay, I'm starting to grasp this concept of hukam a little better, but let's shift gears for a moment and dive into the practical side of things. You mentioned earlier that Osho offers these specific tools and techniques for actually integrating these profound truths into our daily lives.
Yes, absolutely. It's one thing to understand these concepts intellectually, but it's another thing altogether to really embody them.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we move from theory to practice? What can we actually do to cultivate that state of witnessing, that sakshipav, in our everyday lives?
Well, as you might have guessed, one of the most potent practices Osho emphasizes is meditation.
I had a feeling meditation would come up, but meditation can be such a broad term. What specific kind of meditation is he referring to?
He talks about a variety of techniques, but the essence of all of them is about bringing our attention to the present moment. becoming aware of her thoughts and feelings, but without judgment or resistance.
So instead of getting carried away by the stories our minds are creating, we simply observe those thoughts as they arise and pass. Is that all there is to it?
Essentially, yes. It's about developing that detached observation of the mind's activity. It's like watching clouds drift by in the sky. We notice them, but we don't try to grab hold of them or push them away.
That sounds simple enough in theory, but I think we both know it's not always easy in practice. Our minds can be pretty relentless, especially when we're trying to quiet them down.
You're absolutely right. It takes time and practice to really tame that monkey mind, as it's often called. But with consistent effort, we can create that space between our thoughts, allowing this deeper level of stillness and peace to emerge.
Okay, I can see how meditation could be helpful in, calming that mental chatter. But how does simply observing our thoughts lead to this sense of oneness, to that realization that we're not separate from the divine?
That's where things get really interesting. When we observe our thoughts without getting entangled in them, we start to realize that we're not our thoughts. We are the awareness that's witnessing those thoughts. That silent observer kind of behind the scenes.
Wait, we're not our thoughts? That's a pretty radical idea. It feels like our thoughts make up who we are.
It might seem that way, but the more we practice this detached observation, the more we realize that our thoughts are just these fleeting mental events, like bubbles rising and bursting on the surface of a pond. We are the vastness of the pond itself.
So by detaching from our thoughts, we're actually connecting with this deeper, more expansive part of ourselves, a part that isn't bound by those limitations.
Exactly, and that deeper part of ourselves, that pure awareness, it's connected to everything, to the very source of existence. It's a glimpse of the one that we've been talking about.
Wow. So meditation is like a bridge that helps us cross from the shores of separation to that vast ocean of unity.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And what's beautiful about meditation is that it's accessible to everyone, right? You don't need any special equipment or a fancy retreat center. You can practice it anywhere, anytime.
That's encouraging to hear. But I think a lot of people, myself included, struggle with this idea of sitting still and trying to quiet their minds. It can feel incredibly challenging, especially in our fast-paced world.
It can be. But remember, meditation is a practice, not a performance. It's not about achieving some perfect state of blankness or emptying the mind completely. It's about gently cultivating that awareness of what's happening within without judgment or striving.
So it's more about progress, not perfection.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even a few minutes of daily meditation can have this profound impact on our lives. It can reduce stress, improve focus, and help us cultivate a sense of inner peace and clarity.
Okay, so meditation's a key practice for cultivating this witnessing awareness. But what other tools does Osho recommend?
Well, he also emphasizes the importance of bringing this awareness into every aspect of our lives. It's not just about meditating for a set period and then kind of switching back to autopilot. It's about integrating that sakshi bhav into our daily routines and interactions.
So it's about being mindful, bringing that same detached observation to our everyday activities. But how do we actually do that? It seems like our minds are constantly being pulled in a million different directions.
Yeah, well, it starts with simple things, paying attention to the taste of your food, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the sound of your breath. It's about noticing those small details that we often take for granted.
So we're essentially training our minds to stay present, to be in the now, rather than getting lost in thoughts about the past or the future.
Exactly. It's about slowing down, becoming more aware of our surroundings, our bodies, and our internal landscape. It's a process of reawakening to the richness of the present moment.
It's like we're constantly reminding ourselves, hey, I'm here, in this moment, experiencing this.
You got it. And as we cultivate this mindful awareness, we start to see the interconnectedness of everything.
Yeah.
How everything is in constant flux, how nothing is truly separate or static.
And that's when we start to glimpse that underlying unity, that oneness that's at the heart of all existence. It sounds like it takes a lot of effort to shift from our usual way of perceiving the world.
It does require effort, yeah, but it's an effort that yields incredible rewards. It's about rewiring our brains, so to speak, to see beyond those illusions of separation and duality.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these practices can transform our perception of reality. But what about our relationships with others? How does this idea of oneness, this understanding of hukam, impact how we interact with the people in our lives?
That's a great question, yeah. We've been exploring this idea of oneness, this interconnectedness of everything, but how does that actually play out in our relationships? Does it actually change how we interact with our families, our friends, even strangers on the street?
Right. It's like, does this stuff actually make a difference in my daily life?
It absolutely can.
Yeah.
If we genuinely grasp this concept that, we're all manifestations of the same source, that the separation between self and other is ultimately an illusion, it can radically transform how we approach relationships.
So it's not just like this vague feeling of connection to humanity, but seeing that, the divine spark, in every person we encounter. But how do we actually do that? It's easy to say, but how do we actually shift from that like intellectual understanding to actually seeing the world that way?
You're right. It is a profound shift in perception. But remember the practice of witnessing we've been talking about, that same detached observation we cultivate in meditation, well, that can be extended to our interactions with others.
So instead of reacting to people based on our, preconceived notions or judgments, we try to see them through the lens of Sakshipav.
Precisely. It's about recognizing that one, reflecting back at us in countless forms, each interaction becomes an opportunity to really connect with that shared essence, that divine spark that resides within each of us.
That's a beautiful way to look at it. Makes even the most mundane encounters feel kind of sacred.
It does. And it starts to dissolve those artificial barriers we build between ourselves and others, barriers based on differences in race, religion, culture, even personality.
Because those differences, they just pale in comparison to that underlying unity that binds us all, right? But it sounds like a tall order to maintain that perspective, especially when conflicts arise.
Yeah, it's not always easy, especially, when our egos get triggered. But the more we practice witnessing, the more we cultivate compassion and understanding, not just for others, but also for ourselves, right?
So even when we disagree with someone or, we're hurt or angry, we can still kind of hold that space of awareness, recognize that their behavior is, well, probably stemming from their own struggles and insecurities.
Exactly. Remember the concept of hukam. Their actions might be driven by forces they're not even fully aware of. It doesn't excuse harmful behavior, of course, but it allows us to respond with greater wisdom and equanimity, rather than just reacting from a place of ego or defensiveness.
I can see how this perspective could be like incredibly helpful in navigating difficult relationships. But how does the role of the guru fit into all of this? We talked earlier about how, even though true spirituality is an inward journey, it can be beneficial to have that guidance from someone who's, further along the path.
Yeah, you're right. Finding an authentic teacher can provide valuable support and insights on this journey. But it's crucial to remember that the ultimate guru, it resides within.
So we are our own gurus, but how do we access that inner wisdom? It feels like sometimes, I'm completely lost in the fog of my own thoughts and emotions.
It all comes back to those practices we've been discussing. The meditation, the mindfulness, cultivating that sakshi pave in our daily lives. These practices, they create that space for that inner guru to emerge, to guide us from a place of clarity and intuition.
So it's not about seeking answers outside ourselves, but about creating the conditions within for those answers to reveal themselves.
Precisely. But, as you mentioned, external guidance can be helpful. Learning from the teachings of those who've walked this path before us, it can illuminate the way.
Okay. But how do we know who to trust? There seems to be so much information out there, so many teachers, so many teachings. How do we discern between an authentic guide and someone who might be, misleading or even manipulative?
Right. That's an essential question.
Okay.
And Osho actually offers some really valuable guidelines for navigating this landscape. He says to look for a teacher who embodies humility, compassion, and wisdom. Someone who points you back to your own inner authority, not someone who demands like blind faith or obedience.
So they're not interested in followers or disciples.
Not at all. A true guru, they want to empower you to become your own master. They guide you to discover the truth for yourself, not to just blindly accept their word as gospel.
It sounds like finding a genuine teacher is, well, it's kind of like finding a rare gem.
It can be, but trust your intuition. Look for someone who inspires you, who helps you connect with that deeper part of yourself, and who encourages you to question, to explore, and to ultimately find your own unique path.
This has been an incredibly rich and thought-provoking deep dive. I feel like we've covered so much. The science, the spiritual practices, the role of the guru, that transformative power of oneness in our relationships.
It's been a privilege to explore these concepts with you. We've journeyed from the many to the three, to that ultimate one, delving into the teachings of Guru Nanak and Osho along the way.
And we've learned that this journey, it's not just about abstract philosophy, it's about actually embodying these truths in our everyday lives, in our thoughts, our actions, our relationships.
It's a continuous process, awakening to our interconnectedness, cultivating compassion, and recognizing that divine spark within ourselves and in every being we encounter.
Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We hope this exploration has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue on your own unique path towards oneness.
Please like, share and subscribe.